Welcome. Please turn your attention to our interpretation team.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Erwin, and along with Anna, we'll be interpreting from English to Spanish during today's session. We will also have ASL interpretation today, provided by Anne and Paula. First of all, we would like to thank the organizers of this event for their commitment to language justice and to creating multilingual spaces. Language justice includes being able to speak, understand, and be understood in the language in which we feel most comfortable. Creating multilingual spaces is not only the responsibility of the interpreters, but of everyone here, so we'll share some guidelines with you. For those presenting today, you can help by speaking at a moderate pace, loudly and clearly. If we need you to speak more slowly or loudly, we will let you know through the chat. For all participants, please don't suffer in silence. If the interpretation is not working or you're having other technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat so we can help you. After the Spanish announcement, Zoom with interpretation will be turned on, and you'll see a globe icon on the bottom of your screen with a message about language interpretation. Click on the globe, select the language in which you would like to listen to and participate during today's session. If you're joining us through a smartphone, you'll be able to see three little dots on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Select language interpretation, and then select the language in which you would like to listen to and participate. Make sure you click done so that the settings are saved and you'll be set. Switching over to Spanish. En señas americanas, proveído por Anne y Paula. Primero que nada, queremos agradecer a los organizadores de este evento por su compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje y al crear espacios multilingües. La justicia del lenguaje incluye poder hablar, entender y ser entendidos en el idioma en el que nos sintamos más cómodos. El crear espacios multilingües no es solo la responsabilidad de los intérpretes, sino de todas las personas presentes, y por eso les vamos a compartir algunas pautas. Para los presentadores de hoy, pueden ayudar hablando a un ritmo moderado, voz alta y claramente. Si necesitamos que hablen más despacio o más fuerte, se les dejará saber a través del chat. Para todos los participantes, por favor, no sufran en silencio. Si la interpretación no está funcionando o está teniendo otros problemas técnicos, déjenos saber a través del chat para poderle asistir. En un momento se encenderá la interpretación de Zoom y verán un globo terráqueo en la parte baja de sus pantallas con un mensaje sobre la interpretación de idiomas. Haga clic en el globo terráqueo y elijan el idioma en el que les gustaría participar y escuchar durante la sesión de hoy. Si nos acompaña a través de su celular o tableta, puede hacer clic en los tres puntos en la esquina derecha de la parte baja de su pantalla, elija interpretación de idiomas y después seleccione su idioma. Asegúrese de hacer clic en finalizado o done y estarán listos. Okay, we are set to start interpretation.
Thank you. Good afternoon and many thanks to our interpretation team. I am Patty Branco with the National Resources Center on Domestic Violence. I'm wearing a yellow top and yellow gold jewelry. I have brown skin and dark shoulder-length curly hair. Before we begin, we would like to review some brief housekeeping notes with you. To create a multilingual and accessible space, we minimize use of the chat function in our webinars. It's difficult to translate in real time and can be inaccessible to assistive devices. Please feel free to pose any questions in the Q&A pod. We will do our best to gather all the questions from today's session, and we'll save all the questions and follow up with a Q&A document after the webinar. So please do send your questions and we'll be sure to keep all of them. This event features live captioning. You can access this feature by clicking the show captions icon at the bottom of your screen. We also recording the event and we send the recording to every participant as soon as it becomes available. Please reach out to our staff if you experience any accessibility or technical issues, and we'll do our best to help while also hosting the webinar. So welcome to today's webinar, Domestic Violence 101 Back to Basics, designed to help new advocates, allied professionals, students, and the general public achieve a basic understanding of domestic violence and how to be part of the solution. We gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. Today, I am joined from the land of the Catawba, Shira, Sugari, Wateree, and Waxhaw people. If this is the first time that you join one of NRCDV webinars, we would like to invite you to connect with us. NRCDV is a national technical assistance provider working to strengthen the capacity of programs responding to domestic violence victims and their families by promoting effective public policy, institutional response and research, and engagement in prevention. We work with many organizations and partners who bring various expertise, backgrounds, and perspective to improve community response to domestic violence and prevent its occurrence. At NRCDV, we know that domestic violence is preventable, and end domestic violence takes vision. We promise to lead boldly in centering and amplifying voices of survivors and traditionally marginalized communities. We promise to make you feel valued, inspired, equipped, and informed in each and every interaction you have with NRCDV. And we promise to provide opportunities to make you feel invested and connected in the movement to end domestic violence. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to our amazing training and technical assistance specialist, Fatima Yahoma. Fatima brings over a decade of experience in anti-violence movement. She started as a mobile multilingual advocate, where she supported Asian and Pacific Islander victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence in Iowa. Later, she served as a prevention coordinator, where she developed community-based prevention programming in Iowa. Most recently, she worked as national training and technical assistance provider, focused on systems change and community collaboration approaches in rural communities. Fatima holds an MSW and a BA in social work and gender, women's, and sexuality studies from the University of Iowa. In her free time, she enjoys cooking, read, and thrifting. Fatima, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Patty, for getting us started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Domestic Violence 101, Understanding the Basics. I'm so glad to have you here with me today and the NRCDV team as we take the time to learn more about domestic violence. So as Patty mentioned, my name is Fatima. I am an Asian American woman with medium length, straight black hair, and I'm wearing a black sweatshirt. So again, as Patty mentioned, I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Specialist here at NRCDV. If you are unfamiliar with the term technical assistance or TA, it basically means support. So my role is to help you find the information, tools, and resources that you need or are looking for. So whether you're an advocate or a person in a related field or just part of the general public and want to learn more about domestic violence, I'm here to support you in doing that work. So please reach out to us. And I see some folks have started, but if you'd like, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. So let's take a look at what we'll be covering today. So in this presentation, we'll explore the dynamics and common tactics that characterize domestic violence. I will start by defining what domestic violence is, and I'll provide examples of different forms of abuse. Next, I'll provide an overview of the scope and the impact of domestic violence on individuals, our communities, and our society. We'll also take a look at why domestic violence exists and the barriers that survivors face when seeking support. And then finally, we'll explore how we can all be part of the solution. So I'll introduce the ways each of us can support survivors and overall contribute to the movement to end domestic violence. We'll also briefly introduce the work of prevention and what it means to build a future free from violence. So from the title, you can tell this training is meant to serve as an introduction. It's a 101 level overview of domestic violence. There's just no way in 90 minutes that we could cover absolutely everything about domestic violence, but we will do our best to provide you with a foundation for understanding and engaging with the issue of domestic violence in ways that are meaningful to you. Okay, so now that I've introduced myself and shared a bit about NRCDV, or Patty shared a bit about NRCDV, and we've walked through what we'll be discussing today, I'd love to learn about you. So to help me get a sense of who's in the room, I would love to learn what brings you to today's webinar. So I have two poll questions, and I will launch them now. Okay. So what brings you to today's webinar? Are you curious to learn and want to understand more about domestic violence? Are you here because of work-related issues? So this connects to your job or your studies. Are you here to learn more about how to support someone in your life? Or is there another reason? And if you select other, feel free to, again, utilize the chat and drop your response. Just in case, I believe both questions already launched. So in case you see the second question, it's how familiar are you with today's topic? So the responses to that, not familiar at all. This topic is entirely new to you. You're slightly familiar and might have some basic knowledge. You're moderately familiar and have a grasp on key concepts. You're very familiar and understand the topic well, or you're an expert and have a deep understanding. So we have about 71% of folks responding, and it looks like we have a lot of folks who are here because of their work or studies. So I hope that, whatever knowledge you gain today, that it's helpful for you in your work or your studies. And it looks like we have a mix of individuals, some who are slightly familiar, a lot who are moderately or very familiar. So for those who are very familiar or moderately familiar, hopefully we can provide you with a good refresher on what domestic violence is. And we'll share the results. Okay. Perfect. Sorry about that. So I want to take a moment to first talk about the language we use when discussing domestic violence. So the words we choose matter, and they shape how people feel about their experiences, how they engage with support systems like advocates, and whether they feel seen and understood. So first I want to talk about the words used to describe someone who has experienced domestic violence. So on the slide, you'll see the words victim and survivor. And the term victim is often used to describe someone who has experienced domestic violence. So you'll frequently hear this term in the context of the criminal legal system. However, while the term is accurate, not everyone identifies with it personally. So there are individuals that prefer the term survivor because it reflects the resilience and the journey or process of overcoming abuse. There are also others that prefer saying that they're a person who has experienced domestic violence. So there are folks that don't identify with the words or terms victim or survivor at all. I'll share that in my time as an advocate, I've worked with individuals who strongly resonate with the term survivor and others who identify more with victims. For this webinar, I will primarily use the term survivor. Now, when it comes to the person who caused harm, there are also different terms that people use. So terms like abuser, perpetrator, harm doer, or person who caused domestic violence or harm are commonly used. For this webinar, I will primarily use the term abuser, but I encourage all of us to be mindful and intentional about the language we use, especially when speaking directly with survivors. So for some context for why I'm talking about this, I'm talking about language not because I'm here to tell you what to use, but because the words we choose matter. It can shape how people understand their own experiences and whether they feel supported. Again, ultimately, the most supportive language is the language that reflects the preference of the individual. So there's no right term, no one right term. What matters most is respecting how each individual chooses to identify. This is also, and we'll talk about this later, related to how people name the abuse or harm they've experienced. So there are some folks who may openly call it domestic violence or abuse, while others may not use those words at all, or may not be ready to use those words. So again, for this webinar, I will use the term survivor and the terms abuser. Okay, so because this is a 101, I am going to spend a few minutes defining domestic violence. So domestic violence, also referred to as intimate partner violence or IPV, dating abuse or relationship abuse, is a pattern of abusive behaviors, including physical, sexual, and psychological attacks, as well as economic coercion that adults and adolescents use against an intimate partner. And when I say intimate partner, we mean both current and former partners, and that includes dating partners. It's also important to realize that domestic violence doesn't just impact the person in the relationship. So survivors can also include children, other family members, or even household members who are affected by the abuse. At its core, though, domestic violence is about one partner's need to control the other by use of a range of tactics. And these tactics can take on many forms, including physical violence, emotional abuse, financial control, and more. And we'll dive in deeper into those tactics and how they impact survivors over the next few slides. So as I mentioned, domestic violence can take on many forms. People often assume physical violence when they hear domestic violence or abuse, but that's not always the case. And while physical violence is one form of abuse, it's just one of many tactics that a person may use to maintain power and control over their partner. So you can really think of domestic violence as an umbrella term that includes a wide range of abusive behaviors. So imagine an umbrella, and under this umbrella, an abuser may use different tactics to maintain power and control over their partner. Again, that can include physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and more. So as you see on the slide, I'm going to go through some examples of abusive behaviors that can show up in relationships. Okay, so physical abuse. Physical abuse involves the use of physical violence or the threat of it as a way to maintain power and control over someone. This can include actions like hitting, kicking, or restraining someone, as well as using weapons or making threats of physical harm. These behaviors instill fear and reinforce the abuser's power and control in a relationship. So when we talk about domestic violence, it's important to remember that physical violence is just one of the many tactics that an abuser uses to maintain power and control over their partner. Another form of an abusive behavior that can occur in relationships is sexual abuse. So sexual abuse includes any unwanted sexual contact. It involves words or actions of any sexual nature that are carried out against someone's will and without their consent. So this can include rape, coercion, sexual harassment, or really any behavior that violates a person's boundaries. Sexual abuse is about power and disregarding another person's autonomy. And just like physical violence, sexual abuse is another behavior that abusers use to maintain power and control over a partner. However, abuse isn't always physical. So next, we're going to talk about emotional and psychological abuse. Emotional abuse involves non-physical behaviors that are designed to control, isolate, or frighten someone. These behaviors can be harder to identify because they often feel more subtle. However, emotional abuse can include actions like constant criticism, name-calling, gaslighting, or making someone feel unworthy or dependent. So often emotional abuse is about wearing out a survivor's confidence and independence and sense of self, making it easier for an abuser to maintain control. Psychological abuse, which is also on the slide, is the use of verbal and nonverbal communication with the intent to harm someone mentally or emotionally or to exert control. So examples of this include threats, intimidation, manipulation, isolating someone from their support network, usually friends, family, coworkers, really anyone that a survivor could turn to for support and help. The lines between emotional and psychological abuse sometimes overlap, and sometimes the words are even used interchangeably. What's important to understand, though, is that both are deeply harmful. So regardless of the language used to describe the abuse, these tactics just leave survivors feeling trapped, doubting their reality, and unable to seek help. So next is financial or economic abuse, which involves controlling or restricting someone's ability to acquire, use, or maintain economic resources. So this can look like preventing someone from working, controlling their access to bank accounts or financial information, limiting their spending, or running debts in their name. Financial abuse is a tactic that can create dependence and makes it incredibly difficult for survivors to leave their abusive situations. Okay, and the last example we'll go through is digital abuse. So digital abuse is the use of technology and the internet to bully, harass, stalk, intimidate, or control a partner. It's breaking those same relationship boundaries we talked about, but online or virtually. So this includes things like sending threatening messages, requiring immediate responses to texts or calls, monitoring someone's devices or social media, spreading rumors online, or using GPS to track someone's location. Often, because technology is such a big part of our lives, digital abuse can feel inescapable, and it is just as isolating and harmful as other forms of abuse. So again, these are just examples, and the examples we've gone over or covered in the last few slides: physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, financial, and digital abuse. That's not an exhaustive list. We will actually go through more examples using the power and control wheel in a couple of slides. The key takeaway I hope you have from the information I just shared is that domestic violence can take on so many forms, and it doesn't always look the way people expect it to look. And while we've highlighted some common tactics, the dynamics of domestic violence are complex and will vary from one survivor's experience to another. Okay, so we've explored some examples of abusive behaviors, so I want to really quickly revisit the definition of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors that one person uses to maintain power and control over a current or former intimate partner. These behaviors are designed to frighten, terrorize, manipulate, hurt emotionally and physically, humiliate, blame, and often injure, or in the most severe cases, even sometimes kill a current or former intimate partner. So domestic violence doesn't always look the same. It will vary in frequency and the specific tactics used, but at its core, it always comes down to one person's ongoing effort to gain and maintain power and control over their partner. So now that we've revisited the definition of domestic violence, I want to take a closer look at how power and control operates within abusive relationships. So one of the most widely used tools to understand the dynamics of abuse is the power and control wheel. So this tool helps illustrate the different tactics abusers use to exert power and control over their partner. The power and control wheel, which is the image or diagram on the slide, illustrates the various tactics that abusers use to, exert power and control over their partner. So I know the text or the image on the slide is a little hard to read, so please don't worry about trying to read the wheel right now. I'll actually walk through each section in a couple slides. For now, though, I do want to describe the image on the slide. So at the center of the wheel are the words power and control. Surrounding that center are the different tactics and behaviors used to maintain power and control over someone. So basically the tactics used by abusers to keep survivors in relationship to them. And when abusers use those tactics around the wheel, usually multiple tactics, they end up with power and control. So surrounding the words power and control are the behaviors using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, blaming, using children, using privilege, using economic abuse, using coercion and threats. And the outer rings show two more abusive tactics, which we've talked about already: physical abuse and sexual abuse. So these abusive tactics, again, are rarely used in isolation or on their own. Usually multiple forms of abusive behavior are occurring at once. For those who like historical context, this wheel was created in the 1980s by staff at the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project in Duluth, Minnesota. To create this wheel, staff conducted focus groups with women who had experienced domestic violence, and staff asked survivors directly what it was like to live with an abusive partner. So through their stories and the experiences they shared, they created this tool, which again highlights the various tactics abusers used. So this tool has been incredibly useful for survivors, advocates, educators, and other helping professionals in identifying and addressing domestic violence. So now that we've introduced the power and control wheel, and I see in the chat it is difficult to read, we are going to take a closer look at the behaviors surrounding the center of the wheel. So I'll go through each tactic very briefly. This is again to just give you an overview and understanding of what surrounds the wheel. So using intimidation. So one of the tactics on the power and control wheel is using intimidation. Intimidation is about instilling fear and making a survivor feel unsafe, even though direct violence may not be happening in the moment. So this can appear as making someone afraid through looks, gestures, or actions, using looks, gestures, or actions to reinforce control, destroying property, abusing pets to instill fear or punish someone, and blocking exits to prevent someone from leaving. So these actions are not random actions. They are used intentionally by abusers to maintain power and control. Next is emotional abuse. So we've talked about this briefly a bit already, but emotional abuse involves non-physical behaviors that are designed to control, isolate, or frighten someone. Emotional abuse can involve actions like putting someone down or belittling them, making someone feel bad about themselves, calling someone names, playing mind games to manipulate someone's perception of reality, humiliating someone, making someone feel guilty, questioning someone's identity, and reinforcing internalized phobias and isms. Using isolation. So this tactic cuts survivors off from support systems, making them dependent on the abuser. So using isolation can involve controlling what someone does, who they see or who they talk to, limiting someone's outside activities. For example, preventing someone from working, going to school, or participating in social events. Using jealousy to justify actions, making someone account for their whereabouts at all times, saying that no one will believe them if they share their experiences, and not letting someone go anywhere alone. So again, this tactic involves abusers cutting off access to support for survivors. Next, we have minimizing, denying, and blaming. So this tactic shifts accountability away from the abuser and invalidates the survivor's experience. So often this can involve making light of the abuse, denying that it happened in the first place. So again, causing survivors to really question their reality, shifting responsibility for the abuse by refusing to take accountability for their actions, saying that it's the other person's fault or that they deserved it, dismissing it as just fighting, and accusing someone of making them act abusively. Using children. So in relationships where children are involved, abusers may use them as a means for control. So using children can involve making someone feel guilty about the children, using children to relay messages, threatening to take the children away, creating the fear that they will lose custody or all contact with the children, telling someone that they have no parental rights, and finally, threatening to involve an ex or authorities to take the children away. So when this tactic is being used, survivors may feel the need to stay in relationship to protect or maintain contact with their children. The next tactic is using privilege. So this tactic involves abusers leveraging their privilege to control their partner. So examples of using privilege are treating someone like a servant, making all the, in quotation marks, big decisions in the relationships, defining the roles of duties in the relationship, so enforcing unequal power dynamics, using privilege or ability to discredit someone, block access to resources, or use the system against them. And finally, claiming to know what's best for someone and really dismissing someone's autonomy and decision-making. So there we have two more. Next is economic abuse, which we did talk about briefly already. Again, this is about making a survivor financially dependent and making it harder for a survivor to leave a relationship. So economic abuse can look like preventing someone from getting or keeping a job, making someone ask for money, interfering with someone's work or education, taking someone's money or credit cards without permission, not working and requiring someone to provide support, and keeping someone's name off joint assets. And lastly, I'll talk about coercion and threats. So coercion and threats are tactics abusers use to instill fear. So this can take on many forms, including direct threats of harm and manipulation. So often this can look like making and or carrying out threats to harm the survivor, threatening to leave or commit suicide, driving recklessly to frighten someone, threatening to harm others who are important to the survivor, and stalking. So this tactic involves not only making threats to harm the survivor directly, but also their loved ones or even the abuser themselves. So that was a very quick overview of the power and control wheel. In reality, each component we covered today could probably be a 90-minute webinar of its own. What I wanted to share by sharing this tool is that, abuse takes on many forms. This tool has been incredibly valuable for individuals in helping people understand that abuse can look differently. It's not always physical abuse. So again, this wheel has been widely used in advocacy, education, and just general survivor support services to help people recognize abuse in all of its forms and also validate survivors' experiences. Adapted wheels. So over time, the wheel has been adapted in many ways to better represent the diverse experiences and backgrounds of those impacted by abuse. So while the original wheel provides a foundation for understanding abuse, it doesn't fully capture the unique ways power and control can manifest across different relationships, identities, and environments. So these adaptations take that into account. So for example, there are versions of the wheel that specifically are designed for teenagers or young people, older adults, relationships in workplaces, and more. So on the slide is an example of an adapted power and control wheel, which highlights the layered challenges immigrant survivors face and the specific barriers they may face when seeking help. If you look online, there are so many versions of the power and control wheel because domestic violence can impact anyone, and the way it shows up can look differently depending on the context. So, for example, cultural norms in particular will play a big role in shaping how survivors experience and respond to abuse. And these different versions will highlight how abuse looks differently depending on a person's background and experiences. I'll add too, though, while this wheel has been adapted so many times, it's so important to remember that there will be no single version of the wheel that captures every survivor's experience. Domestic violence really impacts people in different ways. And while the wheels and adapted wheels attempt to identify common abusive behaviors, it's just a tool, not a one-size-fits-all explanation. So really think of it as a tool to help survivors and those supporting them recognize common abusive behaviors and patterns. It's really just a starting point for understanding, not a strict definition of what every survivor goes through. So we've spent some time already talking about what domestic violence is, but an important question remains: why do people abuse? So abuse is a learned behavior. They learn it through families of origin, from friends, from popular culture, and from structural inequities embedded in our society that have normalized these power imbalances. Being abusive is also a choice. It's a decision. It's strategic and intentional. People who abuse decide to use these tactics like intimidation, manipulation, and in just general violence because they believe it's an effective way to control and restrict their partner's lives. So people who abuse often believe they have the right to control and restrict their partner's life, choices, and independence. And this belief is reinforced through our cultural norms or systems that have devalued equality and mutual respect in relationships. So who are the survivors? Domestic violence can affect anyone, regardless of background. Anyone can be a survivor of domestic violence. That said, there are certain factors that increase or decrease a person's risk of victimization. So on the side, you'll see various examples of factors that can influence a person's risk of experiencing domestic violence and their ability to seek safety and support. So for example, socioeconomic status, limited resources can increase vulnerability by making it harder to leave an abusive relationship or seek support. For example, survivors with fewer resources may face additional hurdles, such as limited access to safe housing, legal assistance, or healthcare. Immigration status can also be a critical factor affecting a survivor's situation. So survivors who have concerns related to their immigration may be more vulnerable to abuse because their abusers can use threats or withdrawal or legal protections to maintain control. So these are just very brief examples. In short, domestic violence can happen to anyone. However, recognizing that there are risk factors that exist helps us better support survivors by understanding and addressing the unique challenges that they may face. So let's take a moment to talk about the prevalence of domestic violence. So using data from CDC's National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey conducted in 2016 and 2017, data shows how widespread the issue is. About 1 in 4 adult women and approximately 1 in 7 men in the US have reported experiencing severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And almost half of all women and men in the US have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetime. For many survivors, this abuse begins at a young age. So more than 70% of female survivors of intimate partner violence were first victimized before the age of 25, with 1 in 4 victimized before the age of 18. Similarly, more than 60% of male survivors were first victimized before the age of 25 and 1 in 5 before the age of 18. So these statistics highlight 2 critical realities. First, domestic violence is alarmingly common, affecting millions of people. Second, many survivors experience abuse during their formative years, so before the age of 18, which is shaping their understanding of relationships, trust, and safety. So I'll talk more about prevention-related efforts later, but it really highlights why prevention is critical, because we need to reach young people early so we have the opportunity to disrupt and equip people with the tools they need to build healthy relationships. It's also important to note that these numbers likely underestimate the true scope of the problem. Domestic violence is often underreported due to fear, stigma, and lack of resources. So continuing with data from the last slide, it's also important to look at how domestic violence is experienced in the context of different backgrounds and lived experiences. So this does relate to the concept of intersectionality, which we'll discuss on the next slide. But basically, intersectionality examines how identities or social categories intersect and shape a person's lived experiences. So according to data from CDC, more than half of all non-Hispanic multiracial, non-Hispanic American Indian or Alaska Native, and non-Hispanic Black women and men in the US have reported experiencing contact sexual violence, physical violence, and/or stalking by an intimate partner. So often survivors of color are faced with a complex web of factors that are shaping their experiences and access to resources. So in addition to the challenges that all survivors face, there are systemic inequities, biases, and cultural barriers that are furthering the impact and their ability to seek safety and support. So for example, ongoing impacts related to inequities are creating conditions that are increasing vulnerabilities to domestic violence. Biases within systems are making it harder for survivors to seek help. Cultural stigmas surrounding help seeking may discourage reporting or accessing services. And help seeking refers to a survivor's process of disclosing or seeking services. And limited culturally relevant sources makes it more difficult for some survivors to find the support that they need. So I do want to clarify something on this slide. While some communities experience domestic violence in higher rates, this does not mean that these groups are more violent. Instead, the disparities in prevalence reflect the conditions and factors that create a higher risk for domestic violence to occur. And we will talk more about why domestic violence exists in a few slides. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about intersectionality. Domestic violence can never be fully addressed, and the needs of all survivors can never be truly met if we don't consider all aspects of a person's different backgrounds and lived experiences. So this is a term, intersectionality, that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's a framework that considers all aspects of an individual and looks at how those identities intersect and overlap to shape a person's experiences. In the context of domestic violence, intersectionality helps us understand how these overlapping identities influence a survivor's experience of abuse, how they perceive it, the barriers they face, and the decisions they make about seeking help or leaving. So through this lens, hopefully we can begin to understand the full range of experiences and challenges to help seeking and safety that survivors face. So moving on to the impact of domestic violence is a major social problem with serious consequences for survivors, their families and communities, systems, or institutions. So domestic violence has a profound and lasting impact. So again, we're looking at data from CDC. About 1 in 4 women reported being fearful as a result of abuse. And this fear often lingers long after the abusive relationship ends. 1 in 3 women were injured by their intimate partner. 1 in 4 women were concerned for their safety. And this constant threat of violence impacts a survivor's sense of security. 1 in 3 women experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. 1 in 8 women required medical care due to injuries from abuse. And 1 in 6 women needed help from law enforcement. So these numbers show that domestic violence doesn't just cause harm in the moment. It has long-term physical, emotional, and psychological consequences that can affect every aspect of someone's life. It affects their health, their overall well-being, and sense of safety. So we're going to take a look at data from CDC, focusing on men as well. About 1 in 13 men reported feeling fearful as a result of the abuse they experienced. 1 in 5 were injured by their intimate partner. 1 in 14 were concerned for their safety. 1 in 7 experienced symptoms of PTSD. 1 in 23 needed medical care due to injuries from abuse. 1 in 18 needed help from law enforcement. So male survivors may also face barriers to help seeking, such as stigma, societal expectations about masculinity, or disbelief about their experiences. So it's really important that as we're supporting people, as we're going back to our organizations, that we're creating safe spaces where all survivors feel heard, validated, and supported. So domestic violence doesn't only affect those who are abused or harmed directly. It also has ripple effects on family members, friends, coworkers, and overall our broader community. So for example, children who witness domestic violence are particularly vulnerable, and that's even when a child may not have witnessed the abuse directly. Simply just being in the environment can just be as harmful for the children. So folks who are close to the survivor, including children, may also experience similar reactions and feelings to those of the survivor, such as feelings of helplessness or frustration as they try to provide support, fear for the survivor's safety, guilt or self-blame for not recognizing the abuse sooner, emotional distress from witnessing or hearing about the abuse, and in some cases, vicarious trauma from trying to help. The impact of domestic violence on our systems and society. So domestic violence is a major social problem with far-reaching consequences for survivors, their families, communities, and even our systems and institutions. So the financial costs of domestic violence are staggering. Nationally, the medical costs of domestic violence are estimated to range from 2.3 billion to 7 billion annually. So these expenses reflect the ongoing need for medical care, counseling, and other essential services for survivors. Specifically in the workplace, domestic violence also leads to the loss of an estimated 8 million days of paid work each year. So far we've talked about what domestic violence is, why people abuse, and who the survivors are. But the question remains, why does domestic violence exist in the first place? So there are a variety of factors at different levels that may increase or decrease the risk of domestic violence. So on the slide, you'll see the social ecological model, which helps us understand why domestic violence exists by considering factors at multiple levels of our social environment. So this is a public health model, and according to this model, the risk of domestic violence may increase because of the interaction of factors at 4 key levels. So, and those 4 key levels are individual, relationship, community, and societal. So each level plays a role in either increasing risk or creating protective factors against violence. So the first factor is individual level, which focuses on personal factors that may increase the risk of experiencing or perpetrating violence. This includes factors like personal history and experiences and attitudes and behaviors. And while those factors don't necessarily cause abuse, they can shape attitudes and behaviors that are related to power, control, and relationships. At the second level, we have relationships. This level focuses on the people and relationships around us, such as our family, friends, peers, and our partners. So this looks at how interactions between individuals shape behaviors and attitudes and responses to abuse. Next is the community level. Both informal and formal communities that we have in our lives. And this looks at environments we move through every day. So our schools, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our community spaces. And it examines how characteristics of these environments can influence the likelihood of experiencing or perpetrating violence. And finally, the societal level. So this includes broad cultural and structural factors that create environments which violence is either normalized or discouraged. So at the societal level, we're looking at the big picture. So laws, policies, social norms that either prevent or enable violence. So again, this includes cultural norms that may condone or justify violence, as well as policies that reinforce inequities, like those related to economic opportunity, healthcare, and education. Also tied to that, domestic violence is deeply rooted in other forms of violence in our society. So other forms of violence have created conditions that have allowed for domestic violence to exist. So there are power imbalances that exist in our society that have created conditions where abuse has become normalized and even justified. To kind of tie all of this together, domestic violence exists because of the multiple interconnected factors across the individual, relationship, community, and societal levels. And these factors create conditions that increase the risk of violence. So in order for us to understand why domestic violence exists and how we can end it, we have to look into its root causes and contributing factors. Again, that means not only looking at personal attitudes and behaviors, but also our relationships, our communities, and cultural and social norms and policies that make abuse possible in the first place. And if we don't address those root causes, domestic violence will continue to affect survivors, families, and entire communities. The one question that often comes up in discussions about domestic violence, why do people stay in abusive relationships? So leaving any relationship can be difficult. And in abusive situations, it can feel impossible without the right support systems. So I want to also acknowledge that leaving is often one of the most dangerous times for survivors. And that's because abusers may escalate their behavior when they feel that they're losing control, therefore putting the survivor at even greater risk of harm. So again, there are many reasons survivors may stay in relationship, including fear, so fear of retaliation or further violence, embarrassment or shame, intimidation, so intimidation based on ongoing threats and manipulation from the abuser, low self-esteem, normalized abuse. So in some cases, survivors may have grown up in environments where abuse was normalized, making it harder to identify their experience as abusive. Lack or limited resources. So financial dependence, lack of transportation, or lack of housing options can make leaving feel impossible. Children, so survivors may stay in relationship out of concern for their children's safety and well-being. Children, survivors may, mentioned that already, love also. And it's also important to recognize that survivors may still care for their abusive partner and hope that their abusive partner will change. So again, there's so many reasons, whether it's fear or lack of limited sources, children or love, but people are staying in relationships. These reasons are complex, and it's really important that we approach this specific topic without judgment, because survivors deserve to feel supported in their decision-making and their journey to reclaim control in their own lives. So building onto why people stay in abusive relationships, there are also additional barriers to help seeking that survivors may face. So financial resources, some survivors may lack financial means to leave, and without children or without money, survivors may feel trapped, unable to support themselves and their children if they leave the abuser. Affordable housing, so survivors may struggle to find safe and affordable housing, and without stable housing, some survivors leaving might be more difficult because survivors have nowhere to go. Employment experience, so some survivors may not have a strong employment history, or they may be out of work due to abuse-related issues. Therefore, it's harder to support themselves financially once they leave. I recently found a survey by the Corporate Alliance to End Partner Violence, and they found that 64% of respondents who were survivors reported relationship abuse impacting their ability to work. Transportation is also another barrier. So without reliable transportation, survivors may find it difficult to get to safety, access resources, or maintain employment, all of which are essential to leaving the relationship. Childcare, so for survivors with children, the availability and costs of childcare can create an additional barrier. Legal concerns, survivors may face legal challenges, such as custody issues, obtaining protective orders, or just overall navigating the legal system. And these concerns can add to stress and delay their ability to seek safety. And then finally, confidentiality issues. So there are survivors that may not be ready for everyone to know what they've experienced. So this fear can prevent someone from seeking help. This is especially true for survivors who live in rural communities where everyone knows everyone. So there are also social and cultural barriers that can create additional challenges for survivors. Culture plays a significant role in shaping how individuals experience and respond to abuse. So cultural beliefs and values can influence how a survivor understands their situation, how they can perceive help seeking, and what support they may be willing to accept. Language is another major barrier. So survivors who do not speak the dominant language or have limited English proficiency may struggle to communicate their needs, access support, or navigate legal systems. Some services may even lack language access plans, making their resource or their services inaccessible to a survivor. Access to culturally specific services is also crucial. So many survivors may feel comfortable working with advocates that understand their cultural identities and backgrounds. And without access to these resources, survivors may feel isolated or misunderstood. And the final example that I'll talk about is distrust of authorities and systems, which is another significant barrier. Survivors from communities that may have been mistreated or discriminated against by systems or social services may be reluctant to reach out for help. So over the next few minutes or for the remainder of this presentation, we will talk about ways you can support survivors and also prevent domestic violence. As we explore these solutions, please keep in mind these challenges and barriers that can make it difficult for survivors to seek help. So whether it's lack of transportation, concerns about confidentiality, or language barriers, these challenges shouldn't prevent survivors from accessing support and the services they need. And hopefully through this understanding, we can begin to address these barriers and challenges in collaboration with the people that we're trying to support. Okay, so now that we've spent some time defining domestic violence, its impact, prevalence, and the barriers survivors face, we are going to shift our focus for the remainder of this presentation And we're going to spend some time talking about how we can support survivors and play our part in preventing violence. So for the rest of this, we'll talk about what helping looks like, how to offer support in a way that's meaningful, practical, and without pressure. We're also I will also share some resources that you should be aware of in your community. And before we wrap up, we'll very briefly take a moment to talk about the big picture, how each of us can play a role in preventing violence in our communities. So how can we help survivors? One of the most important things we can do is simply listen. So talking about domestic violence, sexual violence, really any form of violence is and can be extremely difficult. So please give survivors space to share their experiences without being interrupted, questioned, or judged. Something I want to add here is that we really don't know what's going on in people's lives. So even though you've gone through this webinar, or you may be a seasoned advocate and have a deeper understanding of what domestic violence is, it's really important to remember that every survivor's experience is unique. So there's no one-size-fits-all story, no single way that abuse looks, no right way for someone to act or react to it. What might seem, simple to us from the outside is often far more complicated for the person that's living through it. Next is to believe them. So when someone opens up about abuse, one of the most powerful things we can do is simply believe them. It takes an incredible amount of courage for survivors to share their experiences, especially when they fear that they won't be taken seriously or that they might be blamed. So really trust their experience, and because that helps validate their reality and encourages them to seek help. Next is to share your concern. So express genuine concern and care for their well-being. So let them know that you care for them. And just as important, let them know that your support isn't conditional. So whether they choose to stay, leave, or aren't sure exactly what to do yet, they need to know that you're there for them no matter what. Acknowledge and validate their feelings. So survivors of abuse often experience a wide range of emotions: fear, anger, confusion, guilt, sadness, and even love for the person who hurt them. All of these feelings are real and valid. So acknowledge that their feelings are okay and let them know that whatever they're feeling is okay. Next is to respect their choices. So survivors have the right to make their own decisions, even if those choices don't make sense to us. So our role as people who are supporting them or as advocates is not to tell them what to do, but to support them in whatever way they need. So empower them by respecting their autonomy. So for example, if a survivor is choosing to stay in a relationship where they're being hurt, remember that leaving is often one of the most dangerous times for a survivor to leave. We have to trust that they're making the safest decision for themselves in that moment. And when we do this, when we respect a survivor's choices and empower them to make decisions on their own and on their own terms, we're giving them back something that their abuser has tried to take away, which is control over their own lives. I already said this, but again, make your support unconditional. No matter what steps they choose to take, if a survivor is not ready to accept help, let them know that you will be there when they are ready. Also encourage them to talk to those who can offer help and guidance. So while your support is incredibly valuable, survivors may also need a professional to help navigate their situation safely. And finally, connect them to resources and support. Sometimes the best way to help a survivor is by guiding them to the right resources. So you can offer support by sharing information, helping them make the call, or even just letting them know what options exist. I'll close us off this section by sharing that you don't have to have all the answers. or know every resource that's out there. To kind of help you though, I did compile a list of resources that would be, helpful to be aware of in your community. So again, survivors may not always know what's available or where to start. And this is where we can step in to help. When it comes to connecting survivors to resources and support, knowing where to look for support can make a huge difference. So when I was working at my previous job with multidisciplinary teams, I always encourage them to engage in this activity called community resource mapping. And that isn't just for organizations and programs. This is something you can do as an individual too. So here are a list of resources to look out for in your communities. And this is not at all an exhaustive list. First is domestic violence programs. These programs offer a wide range of services for survivors. They can include services like emergency shelters, transitional housing, counseling services, safety planning, support groups, sometimes legal services, and sometimes culturally specific resources. If your community does not have a standalone domestic violence program, you can also look at connecting with dual programs. So there are many programs across the country that have combined resources for both domestic and sexual violence. You can also reach out to sexual violence programs to see if they can provide referrals or may be aware of nearby domestic violence advocates or mobile advocates. Each state also has a statewide coalition. These coalitions are designed to provide a network of services and advocacy on a larger scale. So they would be able to guide you to a program near you. So if you don't know where to go in your state, look up your state and the word state domestic violence or sexual violence coalition, and you should be able to find a contact. National hotlines also exist. So for immediate help, there are national hotlines that offer 24/7 support. So for domestic violence, there is the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Community-based resources also play a vital role in helping survivors navigate their journey towards safety and healing. So here are some to be aware of in your community. Community groups or local organizations can provide survivors with a network of support, faith-based and other nonprofits that do work addressing social issues such as housing or employment and family services, food assistance programs, childcare, and other essential services. And then next is medical providers. So healthcare professionals, including doctors, therapists, and counselors, are essential in addressing, the physical and emotional health needs of a survivor. And there are also resources in our community to assist survivors in navigating legal systems. So seek out legal aid programs that might exist near you or pro bono legal services. So this is just a small list. After this presentation, I encourage you to take some time to really learn about what resources exist in your community. There are many more available beyond what I just covered. Okay, so we're just going to wrap up this how to support survivors. I want to emphasize something so important when you're supporting survivors. Please take care of yourselves. While helping someone experiencing domestic violence, it's really important that we're taking care of ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, those who are close to the survivor may be experiencing similar reactions and feelings to those of the survivor. So remember to take care of yourself while helping someone. By taking care of yourself, you can continue to be a source of support. And this might involve you yourself seeking out support from a trusted professional or someone not personally connected to the situation. And the final thing on the slide, you don't need to have all the answers to support someone experiencing domestic violence. Nobody has all the answers. not me, not advocates. This work is done in collaboration with survivors, and they are the experts of their own experiences. So as we close off, throughout this presentation, you may have recognized harmful behaviors in people around you. It's important to remember that change is possible. As we work to support survivors, we also need to think about how we can challenge harmful behavior and encourage accountability for those causing harm or abusing someone. So here are some ways you can do it. First, draw attention to it. If you feel safe doing so, acknowledge the harmful behavior. Tell them what you think. Share your concerns with them directly. Express that their behavior is harmful and that it's not acceptable. Also, describe alternative behaviors. So help them understand that there are healthier ways to handle situations. Offering alternative behaviors can show them that change is possible. And by doing this, we can contribute to creating a culture where violence in our communities is not tolerated, and also that everyone has the opportunity to change. And I promise we're almost done. I know I provided a lot of information, but like I said, I wanted to provide or give us a moment to talk about the role we can play in preventing violence from occurring. So domestic violence is preventable. Despite the many factors we talked about that condone or enable violence, we do have the ability to create change and challenge those factors and conditions that have allowed for domestic violence to happen. So we touched on the social ecological model earlier and explained how various factors at all levels contribute to domestic violence's existence. Again, those 4 levels are individual, relationship, community, and society. Each level plays a role in why domestic violence exists. However, there are also prevention strategies that can disrupt the conditions that allow for domestic violence to occur. So the goal of prevention is to stop violence before it occurs, before someone is harmed and before someone causes harm. So I won't go through each of those strategies in detail. Again, this is a 101. I just wanted to share that we can disrupt and prevent domestic violence from occurring. And prevention efforts will reduce the occurrence of intimate partner violence by promoting healthy, respectful relationships and addressing the factors and root causes that are contributing to violence. So please know we do have the ability to address the conditions that have allowed for domestic violence to happen. So that really brings us to the end of this webinar. I know we covered a lot of information. There's really so much more we could discuss. But again, this was a 101. It's foundational information about domestic violence. If anything, I hope from this presentation that you can take away that there's no way for us to have all the answers on how to support someone experiencing abuse. Nobody has all the answers. I encourage you all to, at the end of this presentation, continue taking the time to learn, reflect, and engage in this work in ways that are really meaningful to you. So again, thank you for being here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, we're here for TA, so technical assistance. We're here to support you. Email us. We're happy to look for resources on your behalf, or find resources or create resources for you. I always encourage folks to reach out to us for training and technical assistance. So I will close off by handing it to Patty, who will close us off here.
Thank you so much, Fatima. Your presentation has been truly a gift. Thank you, thank you. There's lots of appreciation and love in the chat, stream your way. So thank you. Many thanks also to our wonderful interpretation team. And of course, many thanks to all of you who took the time to join us today. We received some great questions in the chat and in the Q&A pod, and Brecca has already offered some initial responses, both in the chat and the Q&A pod. Our time is up now, but we will answer the questions as thoughtfully as possible in writing, and we will be sending you a document after the webinar, hopefully next week, with some questions and answers, okay? We are also expect to receive some your certificates of attendance. We will be sending that to everyone who attended today. And the slide deck and recording will also be made available. So stay tuned. To learn more about our resources and upcoming events, please follow us at NRCDV on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And last but not least, this event was made possible by a grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, the Office of Family Violence Prevention Service. Its contents are solely the responsibility of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I would be very grateful if you would take a few minutes to respond to a brief survey to help us improve our services in the future. So the link has been shared in the chat, and there is also a code being shared in the slide. But yes, so please take the time to take the survey. And again, thank you all so very much. Have a rest of your day.